The private jet soared high above the clouds, its sleek frame cutting through the sky like a blade. Inside, the hum of the engines was steady and calm, almost soothing. Vanessa Monroe sat in one of the plush leather seats, her eyes fixed on the window as she watched the endless expanse of blue stretch out before her. She had always loved flying. It made her feel free, untouchable, like nothing could reach her up here. But today, something felt different. Something wasn't right. Chris? The pilot had been quiet since takeoff. Too quiet. Normally, he would crack jokes over the intercom or share interesting facts about their route. Today, though, there was no chatter, no warmth in his voice when he announced they were climbing to cruising altitude. Vanessa tried to shake off the feeling that something was wrong. Pilots had bad days too, didn't they? Still, she couldn't help but glance toward the closed cockpit door every few minutes. Vanessa was used to being in control. As a self-made billionaire, she had built her empire from scratch, turning her passion for renewable energy into a global movement. Her company, Solaris Tech, had revolutionized the way people thought about sustainability. But success came with enemies. And Vanessa had learned early on not to trust anyone completely. That instinct had kept her alive more times than she cared to admit. She leaned back in her seat and sighed, trying to focus on the positives. This trip was supposed to be a celebration. After months of negotiations, she was finally closing a deal that would bring clean energy solutions to underserved communities across Africa. It was a project close to her heart, and she couldn't wait to see it come to life. The meeting in London had gone better than expected, and now she was heading home to New York to finalize everything. But the nagging feeling wouldn't go away. Chris's silence weighed heavily on her mind. She glanced at her watch. They should have been halfway to their destination by now. Why hadn't he updated her on their progress? Deciding she'd had enough, Vanessa unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up. She walked to the cockpit door and knocked lightly. "Chris?" she called. "Out. Is everything okay?" There was no response. She knocked again, louder this time. "Chris, can you hear me?" Still nothing. A wave of unease washed over her. This wasn't normal. Even if Chris was busy, he would have acknowledged her by now. Vanessa pressed her ear against the cold metal of the door, straining to hear any sound from inside. At first, all she heard was the faint hum of the instruments. Then suddenly the plane lurched violently to the side, throwing her off balance. She grabbed onto the wall to steady herself as the cabin tilted sharply. "What the—" she began, but her words were cut off as another jolt rocked the aircraft. Her stomach dropped as she realized they were descending rapidly. The seatbelt sign flashed on overhead, accompanied by the sharp ping of the warning tone. Vanessa stumbled back to her seat and fastened her belt, her heart pounding in her chest. "Chris!" she shouted again, panic rising in her voice. "What's going on?" This time there was a response, but it wasn't what she expected. Over the intercom, Chris's voice came through, low and strained. "Please remain seated, Ms. Monroe. I'll explain everything once we land." "Land? What do you mean, land? We're not supposed to be landing yet," Vanessa demanded, gripping the armrests tightly. "Where are you taking us?" "I'm sorry," Chris replied, his tone oddly detached. "I don't have a choice." Vanessa's mind raced. Was this some kind of hijacking? Had someone threatened him, or was this personal? She knew she wasn't universally liked. Her outspoken views on corporate responsibility had earned her plenty of critics, but she never imagined anyone would go this far. The plane continued its steep descent, the pressure in the cabin growing heavier with each passing second. Outside the window, the fluffy white clouds gave way to patches of blue ocean below. They weren't heading toward an airport, that much was clear. The water stretched endlessly in every direction, broken only by the occasional speck of land far in the distance. Vanessa's phone buzzed in her pocket, startling her. She pulled it out and saw several missed calls and messages from her assistant, Laura. Apparently, Solaris Tech's security team had lost contact with the flight shortly after takeoff. They were already scrambling to locate the plane. Vanessa quickly typed out a reply. "Something's wrong. Contact authorities immediately." Before she could hit send, the screen flickered and went dark. The plane must have entered a dead zone. Frustrated, Vanessa shoved the phone back into her pocket. She needed to think to figure out what was happening. If Chris wasn't acting of his own free will, then who was behind this? And why target her specifically? As the plane drew closer to the surface, Vanessa spotted a small airstrip ahead. It looked makeshift, barely more than a strip of dirt carved into the jungle. Her stomach churned as the wheels touched down with a jarring thud. The engine noise died down, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the cockpit door opened and Chris stepped out. His face was pale, his hands trembling slightly as he avoided meeting her gaze. Behind him, two men appeared, both dressed in tactical gear and carrying weapons. One of them gestured for Vanessa to stand up. "Stay calm," Chris muttered under his breath as he passed her. "Do what they say." Vanessa stared at him, disbelief and anger flashing in her eyes. "You betrayed me," she said, her voice sharp. "After everything I've done for you." "It's not what you think," Chris interrupted, his voice barely audible. "I didn't have a choice." "Enough talking," one of the armed men barked, stepping forward. He grabbed Vanessa by the arm and pulled her toward the exit. She resisted, digging her heels into the carpet. But it was no use. These men were stronger, faster, and clearly prepared for resistance. They led her down the steps of the plane and onto the dusty airstrip. The heat hit her like a wall, sticky and oppressive. Surrounding them was dense jungle, its green canopy stretching as far as the eye could see. In the distance, Vanessa could make out the outline of a compound, a cluster of buildings surrounded by high fences topped with barbed wire. As they approached the gates, Vanessa noticed cameras mounted along the perimeter, their lenses glinting in the sunlight. Whoever these people were, they weren't amateurs. This operation was professional, calculated, and that terrified her more than anything else. Once inside the compound, Vanessa was taken to a dimly lit room and forced into a chair. Her hands were bound behind her back, and a hood was placed over her head. She struggled to stay calm, focusing on her breathing as the seconds ticked by. Finally, the hood was removed, revealing a man sitting across from her. He was middle-aged with sharp features and piercing gray eyes that seemed to bore straight through her. "My name is Daniel," he said, leaning forward slightly. "And you, Ms. Monroe, are very important to us." Vanessa glared at him, refusing to show fear. "If you think I'm going to cooperate, you're wasting your time." Daniel chuckled softly, a sound that sent shivers down her spine. "Oh, I don't expect cooperation, at least not yet. But rest assured you hold information we need. Information that could change the world." Vanessa's mind raced. What could they possibly want from her? She ran a successful company, yes, but she wasn't involved in anything controversial, or so she thought. Whatever they were after, she vowed not to give it to them, not without a fight. Little did she know, the truth was far bigger and far darker than she could have ever imagined. The room was small and windowless, with bare concrete walls that felt cold even in the oppressive heat of the compound. Vanessa sat stiffly in the metal chair, her hands still bound behind her back. Her dark eyes burned with defiance as she stared at Daniel, who leaned casually against the edge of a wooden table. He didn't seem rushed or nervous. In fact, he almost looked amused by her resistance. "You're wasting your time," Vanessa said again, her voice steady, despite the knot of fear tightening in her chest. "I don't know what you think." "I have, but you're wrong." Daniel tilted his head slightly, studying her like a scientist examining an interesting specimen. "You underestimate yourself, Ms. Monroe. You've always been at the center of things, whether you realize it or not. Your connections, your influence, they make you valuable." Vanessa clenched her jaw. She hated being talked down to, especially by someone like him, someone who thought they could intimidate her into submission. "If you wanted money, there are easier ways to get it," she shot back. "Kidnapping isn't exactly subtle." Daniel chuckled softly, shaking his head. "This isn't about money, not directly anyway." He straightened up and walked around the table, stopping just a few feet away from her. "It's about something much bigger. Something you've unknowingly been tied to for years. Vanessa frowned, confusion mixing with her anger. What are you talking about? Instead of answering, Daniel gestured to one of the armed men standing guard near the door. The man stepped forward and placed a laptop on the table in front of Vanessa. Daniel opened it and turned the screen toward her. On it was a series of documents and photos, some labeled with names and dates that meant nothing to her at first glance. Do you recognize any of this? Daniel asked, his tone deceptively calm. Vanessa scanned the files quickly, searching for anything familiar. Most of it seemed like technical jargon, scientific terms and project codes that made no sense to her. But then she saw something that caught her attention. A logo stamped in the corner of one document. It was faded, but unmistakable. Eden Initiative. Her breath hitched. She had heard that name before, though she couldn't remember where. Still, something about it sent a chill running down her spine. What is this? She demanded, her voice sharper now. Daniel smiled faintly, clearly pleased by her reaction. Eden Initiative is, well, let's call it a special kind of organization. They fund research, groundbreaking, world-changing research. But they also operate in the shadows, far away from public scrutiny. Vanessa shook her head, trying to process what he was saying. I don't understand. Why are you showing me this? What does it have to do with me? Daniel crossed his arms over his chest, his expression hardening. Because your father was one of them. The words hit Vanessa like a punch to the gut. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. Her father, Marcus Monroe, had died when she was just a teenager. She remembered him as a kind, brilliant man who worked tirelessly to provide for their family. He had always been secretive about his job, claiming it was too complicated to explain. But Vanessa had never doubted his integrity. To hear Daniel suggest otherwise felt like a betrayal, not just of her father, but of everything she believed about him. That's impossible, she said finally, her voice trembling slightly. My father wouldn't be involved in anything unethical. Wouldn't he? Daniel countered, raising an eyebrow. Think about it, Ms. Monroe. How much do you really know about his work? About the people he spent his days with? Vanessa opened her mouth to argue, but the words caught in her throat. The truth was, she didn't know much. After her father's death, her mother had destroyed most of his belongings, saying it was too painful to keep reminders of him around. Vanessa had accepted that explanation at the time, but now doubt began to creep in. What if there had been more to his story? Before she could respond, Daniel leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. Eden Initiative isn't just funding research. They're experimenting on humans, altering DNA, creating enhancements, and your father helped lay the groundwork for all of it. Vanessa recoiled, disgust rising in her stomach. No, she said firmly. You're lying. I wish I were, Daniel replied, his tone almost sympathetic. But I'm not. Eden has been operating under the radar for decades, using its wealth and influence to push boundaries no one else dares to cross. And your father played a key role in making that happen. Vanessa shook her head violently, refusing to believe him. Even if that were true, and I'm not saying it is, what does it have to do with me? I haven't seen those people since I was a kid. Daniel sighed, as if disappointed by her denial. You may not realize it, but you're connected to them in ways you can't even imagine. Your company, Solaris Tech, it's funded projects linked to Eden, projects that have advanced their goals without you knowing it. Vanessa froze, her mind racing. Was that possible? Could her own work have inadvertently supported something so sinister? She thought back to some of the partnerships she'd formed over the years, the grants she'd accepted from anonymous donors. At the time, she had assumed they were legitimate. Now she wasn't so sure. You need to tell us what you know, Daniel continued, his voice firm now. Every detail matters. If we can expose Eden, we might be able to stop them before it's too late. Vanessa hesitated, torn between disbelief and a growing sense of unease. Part of her wanted to dismiss Daniel's claims as nonsense, but another part, the part that remembered her father's cryptic phone calls and late-night meetings, couldn't shake the feeling that there was truth in his words. "I don't know anything," she said finally, her voice low. "But even if I did, why should I trust you? For all I know, you're just as bad as they are." Daniel nodded as if expecting her response. "Fair point. Trust is earned, not given. But consider this. We didn't bring you here to harm you. We brought you here because we need your help. Without you, we can't take Eden down." Vanessa glanced at the armed guards standing nearby, their faces impassive. She knew she didn't have much of a choice, at least not right now. If she wanted answers, she would have to play along. For now. "Fine," she said reluctantly, "but if you're lying to me, I'll find a way to make you regret it." Daniel smirked, clearly unfazed by her threat. "We'll see how things go. In the meantime," he gestured to one of the guards, who untied Vanessa's hands and led her out of the room. As she was escorted down a narrow hallway, Vanessa tried to piece together everything she had learned. Her father's involvement with Eden, the questionable funding behind Solaris Tech, the strange urgency in Daniel's voice. It all pointed to something far larger than she could comprehend. Whatever it was, it had already cost her freedom. And, based on Daniel's warnings, it might cost her much more. Back in the cockpit of the plane, Chris sat alone, staring at the dashboard. The adrenaline rush from earlier had worn off, leaving him hollow and exhausted. He replayed the events of the past hour in his mind, each decision weighing heavier than the last. He had known this mission would come with risks, but he hadn't anticipated the guilt that now gnawed at him. Chris had agreed to help Daniel because he had no other options. Years ago, his wife and daughter had died in a factory explosion caused by corporate negligence, a disaster that could have been prevented if the company had followed safety regulations. When Daniel approached him with evidence linking Eden, initiative to similar tragedies, Chris had seen it as a chance to fight back, a chance to hold someone accountable. But seeing Vanessa's face, the shock, the anger, the fear had shaken him. She didn't deserve this. No matter what her father had done, she wasn't responsible for Eden's crimes. And yet, here, she was caught in the middle of something she couldn't possibly understand. Chris rubbed his temples, trying to silence the voices in his head. He knew he couldn't undo what he had done, but maybe he could still make things right. If Vanessa really was innocent, then protecting her might be the only way to redeem himself. He stood up and grabbed his jacket, slipping quietly out of the plane. The compound was bustling with activity, guards patrolling the perimeter and technicians working in makeshift labs. Chris moved cautiously, keeping his head down as he navigated the maze of buildings. He needed to find Vanessa, to warn her, to apologize, to figure out what came next. When he finally reached the holding area, he spotted her through a cracked door. She was pacing back and forth, her expression tense but determined. Chris hesitated, unsure of what to say. Before he could decide, one of Daniel's men appeared beside him. "She's tougher than she looks," the man remarked, nodding toward Vanessa. "Daniel thinks she'll crack eventually." Chris forced a smile, masking his unease. "Yeah, well, good luck with that." The man laughed and walked away, leaving Chris alone with his thoughts. He watched Vanessa for a moment longer, his resolve hardening. Whatever happened next, he wouldn't let her face it alone. Vanessa paced the small room like a caged animal, her mind racing with questions and doubts. She couldn't stop thinking about what Daniel had said, about her father, about Eden Initiative, about Solaris Tech. It all sounded impossible, yet part of her couldn't dismiss it entirely. Her father had always been secretive, and there were moments in her childhood when she'd overheard him talking to strangers late at night. At the time, she'd assumed he was just stressed from work. Now those memories felt heavier, more ominous. Doors creaked open, pulling her out of her thoughts. Chris stepped inside, his face pale and drawn. He closed the door behind him and leaned against it, his eyes avoiding hers. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was thick, charged with unspoken tension. "You shouldn't be here," Vanessa said finally, her voice cold. "What do you want?" Chris swallowed hard, his hands trembling slightly as he shoved them into his pockets. I wanted to explain. Explain? Vanessa snapped, her anger bubbling to the surface. You betrayed me, Chris. You put me on this plane knowing exactly where we were going. How could you do that? I didn't have a choice, Chris replied, his voice cracking under the weight of guilt. They threatened my life. They said if I didn't cooperate, they'd kill me, and make sure my family paid the price too. Vanessa crossed her arms over her chest, her expression skeptical. That's convenient, everyone has a sob story, don't they? It's not a story, Chris insisted, taking a step closer. Look, I lost my wife and daughter because of corporate greed. A factory exploded because some company cut corners to save money. That's why I agreed to help Daniel. He promised me justice. For them, for everyone who suffered because of people like Eden. Vanessa stared at him, searching his face for any sign of deception. To her surprise, she found none. His pain was real, raw, but that didn't excuse what he had done. So you decided to drag me into your revenge plot? Do you even know what they're planning to do with me? Chris shook his head. Not exactly. But I know it's bad. And I'm starting to think Daniel might not be telling me everything. Vanessa let out a bitter laugh. Well, that makes two of us. For a moment, they stood in silence, the air heavy with unresolved conflict. Then Chris spoke again, his voice softer this time. I'm sorry, Vanessa. I never meant for this to happen to you. If I could take it back, I would. Vanessa looked away, her anger warring with a reluctant sense of pity. She knew how it felt to lose someone you loved, to feel powerless in the face of tragedy. Maybe Chris wasn't the villain here, but that didn't mean she trusted him. Not yet. Just tell me one thing, she said after a pause. Do you believe what Daniel said about my father? About Eden? Chris hesitated, then nodded slowly. Yeah, I do. I've seen enough evidence to know they're dangerous, but whether your dad was involved, I don't know. That's something you'll have to figure out. Vanessa sighed, rubbing her temples. Great. So now I'm stuck in the middle of some conspiracy theory, accused of being connected to a shadowy organization I've never even heard of. Chris offered a weak smile. Welcome to my world. Despite herself, Vanessa almost laughed. Almost. This isn't funny, Chris. No, it's not, he admitted. But maybe we can use it to our advantage. If we work together, we might be able to get out of here. Vanessa raised an eyebrow. And how do you propose we do that? We're surrounded by armed guards locked in a compound in the middle of nowhere. Chris glanced toward the door, lowering his voice. Daniel doesn't know I'm here. He thinks I'm still securing the plane. If we act fast, we might be able to sneak out before anyone notices. Vanessa studied him carefully, weighing the risks. Trusting Chris was a gamble, but staying here wasn't an option either. Fine, she said finally. But if you double-cross me again, I swear I'll make you regret it. Chris nodded, relief flickering across his face. Understood, let's go. The compound was eerily quiet as they slipped out of the room, sticking to the shadows to avoid detection. Chris led the way, his movements cautious but deliberate. Vanessa followed closely behind, her heart pounding in her chest. Every sound, the rustle of leaves, the distant hum of machinery, felt amplified, like the world itself was holding its breath. They reached the edge of the compound without incident, ducking behind a stack of crates near the fence. Beyond it lay dense jungle, its green canopy stretching endlessly into the distance. Freedom was so close, but getting there wouldn't be easy. There's a weak spot in the fence about 50 yards to the left, Chris whispered, pointing toward a cluster of trees. We can cut through there. Vanessa nodded, her grip tightening on the small pocket knife Chris had given her earlier. They moved quickly, crouching low to stay out of sight. When they reached the fence, Chris pulled out a pair of wire cutters and began working on the chain links. The metallic scrape of the tool echoed loudly in the stillness, making Vanessa flinch. Hurry, she urged, glancing nervously over her shoulder. I'm trying, Chris muttered, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. Finally, the last link snapped free, creating a gap just wide enough for them to squeeze through. Go! Vanessa didn't need to be told twice. She crawled through the opening, Chris right behind her. As soon as they were clear, they bolted into the jungle, their feet crunching against the dry leaves littering the forest floor. The further they ran, the darker the jungle became. Thick vines snaked across their path, forcing them to slow down and navigate carefully. The heat was suffocating, clinging to their skin like a second layer. Vanessa's lungs burned with every breath, but she pushed herself forward, driven by sheer determination. After what felt like hours, they stumbled upon a clearing. In the center stood the remnants of an old research lab, its walls crumbling and overgrown with moss. A faded sign hung above the entrance. Eden Initiative Testing Facility, Dorsch 12. Vanessa froze, her stomach sinking. What is this place? Chrissy frowned, stepping closer to examine the sign. It looks abandoned. Probably one of Eden's old sites. Why would they leave it here? Vanessa asked, her voice tinged with unease. If they're so secretive, wouldn't they destroy it? Maybe they thought no one would find it, Chris suggested. Or maybe they forgot about it. Either way, it's worth checking out. Reluctantly, Vanessa followed him inside. The interior was dimly lit, dust motes swirling in the beams of sunlight filtering through cracks in the ceiling. Rows of rusted equipment lined the walls, along with shelves stacked with files and journals. It looked like a graveyard of failed experiments. Vanessa wandered over to one of the shelves and picked up a notebook, flipping through its pages. Her eyes widened as she skimmed the contents. Notes on genetic modification, human trials, side effects. It was all there, documented, in painstaking detail. Some entries described patients experiencing severe physical deformities, while others mentioned psychological breakdowns. The horror of it made her sick to her stomach. This is monstrous, she whispered, her hands trembling as she set the notebook down. Chris joined her, his expression grim. It gets worse. He pointed to a nearby table where a computer monitor sat partially buried under debris. Its screen flickered faintly, powered by some forgotten backup system. Curious, Vanessa brushed off the dust and tapped a few keys. The machine whirred to life, displaying a login prompt. Try entering admin, Chris suggested. Vanessa typed it in, holding her breath as the system processed the command. To her surprise, the screen changed, revealing a folder labeled Confidential Files. She clicked on it, her pulse quickening as a series of videos and documents appeared. One video caught her attention immediately. It was time-stamped 15 years ago, shortly before her father's death. With shaking fingers, she pressed play. The footage showed a man sitting at a desk, his face pale and weary. It took her a moment to recognize him. It was her father, Marcus Monroe. Vanessa, he began, his voice strained. If you're watching this, it means something has gone terribly wrong. I tried to stop them, but they won't listen. Eden Initiative. It started with good intentions, but now it's spiraling out of control. They're experimenting on people, altering DNA in ways that could destroy humanity. I helped build this monster and I failed to stop it. Tears welled up in Vanessa's eyes as she listened, her chest tightening with grief and anger. Her father hadn't been the hero she'd imagined, but he hadn't been a villain either. He had tried to do the right thing, even if it cost him his life. They killed me to keep me quiet, Marcus continued, his voice breaking. But I recorded this in the hope that someone, anyone, would finish what I started. Stop Eden, Vanessa. Please. For me, for your mother, for everyone who deserves a better future. The screen went black, leaving Vanessa and Chris in stunned silence. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Chris cleared his throat, his voice barely above a whisper. We have to expose this, he said. The world needs to know. Vanessa nodded, wiping her tears away with the back of her hand. Yes, but first we need to survive. Outside, the jungle seemed darker than before, the shadows closing in around them. Somewhere in the distance, a bird screeched, its cry echoing through the trees. Vanessa took a deep breath, steeling herself for whatever came next. She didn't know how they would get out of this alive, but one thing was certain, She wasn't going to let Eden win. Not now, not ever. The jungle was alive with sounds, crickets chirping, leaves rustling in the breeze, and the occasional distant call of an unknown bird. But to Vanessa and Chris, it felt eerily silent. The weight of what they had discovered pressed down on them like a physical force. They stood in the clearing near the abandoned lab, the evidence of Eden's crimes burning a hole in their minds. "We can't stay here," Chris said finally, breaking the heavy silence. "If Daniel finds out we escaped, he'll send people after us." Vanessa nodded, her jaw clenched tightly. She glanced back at the crumbling lab, her thoughts swirling. The video of her father replayed in her mind over and over again. His voice, his face, it all felt so real, so raw. He had tried to stop Eden and they had silenced him for it. Now, it was up to her to finish what he started. "Where do we go?" she asked, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. "We're in the middle of nowhere. No phones, no way to contact anyone." Chris frowned, scanning their surroundings. "There has to be a town or village nearby. If we keep moving, we might find help." Vanessa raised an eyebrow. "And if we don't, what then?" "Then we figure something else out," Chris replied firmly. "We don't have time to second-guess ourselves. Every minute we waste is another minute Eden stays hidden." She hesitated but eventually nodded. He was right. They couldn't afford to stand still. Taking one last look at the lab, Vanessa turned and followed Chris deeper into the jungle. The hours passed slowly, each step feeling heavier than the last. The heat was relentless, sapping their energy and making every movement feel like a struggle. Their clothes clung to their skin, damp with sweat. Thorns scratched at their arms and legs as they pushed through thick underbrush, leaving small cuts that stung in the humid air. Despite the exhaustion, Vanessa refused to slow down. Her determination burned brighter than ever, fueled by the memory of her father's warning. She thought about all the lives Eden had ruined, the families torn apart, the bodies experimented on, the futures stolen. It made her sick to think about how close she had been to unknowingly supporting them through Solaris Tech. Chris noticed her quiet intensity and kept pace beside her. "You okay?" he asked after a while, his voice soft. "No," Vanessa admitted, bluntly. "But I will be once we take them down." Chris didn't respond immediately. Instead, he focused on navigating the dense foliage ahead. After a few moments, he spoke again. "I know you don't trust me fully and I don't blame you. But I swear, I'm not going to let anything happen to you. Not anymore." Vanessa glanced at him sideways, studying his expression. There was sincerity in his eyes, a vulnerability that matched her own pain. For the first time since this nightmare began, she allowed herself to believe him, even if only a little. "Thank you," she said simply, her tone softer than before. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the jungle floor, they stumbled upon a narrow dirt path. It was barely visible beneath the overgrowth, but it was enough to give them hope. "This could lead somewhere," Chris said, pointing down the trail. "Let's follow it." They walked faster now, the path guiding their way through the maze of trees. The jungle seemed less oppressive along the trail, as if nature itself had carved out a lifeline for them. After another hour of walking, they heard the faint sound of voices in the distance. "Do you hear that?" Vanessa whispered, stopping abruptly. Chris held up a hand, signaling for silence. They both listened carefully, straining to identify the source of the noise. It sounded like people talking, human voices cutting through the wilderness. "It might be a village," Chris said quietly. "Stay close to me." They crept forward cautiously, staying low to avoid being seen. As they rounded a bend in the path, the trees opened up to reveal a cluster of small wooden huts surrounded by fields of crops. Children played near a stream, their laughter carrying through the air. Villagers moved about, tending to their daily tasks. It was a stark contrast to the chaos they had left behind. Vanessa felt a surge of relief wash over her. They weren't alone anymore. "Should we approach them?" she asked, glancing at Chris. He nodded. We need food and water, and maybe someone here knows how to get to a bigger town. Just let me do the talking." Together they stepped out of the jungle and into the open. A few villagers noticed them immediately and stopped what they were doing, staring curiously. One older man approached cautiously, his weathered face lined with worry. "Who are you?" he asked in broken English, his eyes darting between Vanessa and Chris. "We're travelers," Chris explained quickly. "Our plane crashed nearby and we've been lost in the jungle. We need help." The man studied them for a moment longer before nodding slowly. "Come," he said, gesturing for them to follow. He led them to one of the larger huts, where a group of women prepared a simple meal over an open fire. The smell of cooking rice and vegetables filled the air, making Vanessa's stomach growl audibly. The man introduced himself as Paolo and explained that the village rarely saw outsiders but welcomed those in need. Over the next hour, Vanessa and Chris shared a basic version of their story, careful not to reveal too much about Eden or the compound. The villagers listened intently, offering sympathy and advice. One young woman mentioned that there was a trading post about 2 days' walk away, where trucks occasionally stopped to pick up supplies. From there, they could potentially reach a city. "We'll leave at first light," Chris told Vanessa, after thanking the villagers for their hospitality. "It's our best chance." Vanessa agreed, though sleep eluded her that night. She lay on a thin mat inside the hut, staring at the ceiling as the events of the past few days replayed in her mind. Her father's confession haunted her, his fear, his regret, his plea for justice. She vowed silently that she wouldn't rest until Eden was exposed, no matter the cost. The journey to the trading post was grueling, but uneventful. By the second day, their supplies were nearly depleted, and fatigue weighed heavily on their bodies. When they finally arrived, the sight of the bustling outpost brought a renewed sense of hope. Trucks came and went, carrying goods to and from nearby towns. Merchants shouted prices and workers loaded crates onto vehicles. Vanessa and Chris blended into the crowd, keeping their heads down as they searched for a way to escape. "I see a truck heading to the city," Chris said, pointing to a large vehicle parked near the edge of the lot. "If we can sneak aboard, we might make it out of here." Vanessa nodded. "Let's do it." They waited until the driver stepped away to grab lunch, then slipped into the back of the truck unnoticed. Hidden among boxes of produce, they held their breath as the engine roared to life and the vehicle lurched forward. Hours passed as the truck rumbled along bumpy roads. Vanessa leaned against Chris, her body aching, but her resolve unshaken. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to imagine a future beyond this nightmare. A future where Eden's secrets were laid bare for the world to see. When the truck finally rolled to a stop in the outskirts of a bustling city, Vanessa and Chris climbed out quietly, blending into the urban chaos. The skyline loomed above them, a symbol of progress and opportunity. But Vanessa knew the fight was far from over. "What's the plan now?" Chris asked, looking at her expectantly. Vanessa took a deep breath, her eyes narrowing with determination. "We expose them. All of it. My company, my resources. We'll use everything I have to bring Eden down." Chris smiled faintly, admiration flickering in his gaze. "Whatever you need, I'm with you." Side by side, they stepped into the city, ready to ignite a battle that would change the world forever. The city was a cacophony of noise and movement. Cars honked their horns, people shouted into phones, and street vendors called out to passers-by, hawking everything from fresh fruit to counterfeit watches. Vanessa and Chris wove through the crowded streets, their faces tense but focused. They had made it this far, but they both knew the hardest part was still ahead. Vanessa's mind raced as she tried to piece together a plan. She had resources at her disposal, money, influence, connections, but using them carelessly could tip off Eden. If they suspected she was onto them, they might disappear completely, erasing any chance of exposing the truth. Every move had to be calculated, every step deliberate. "We need somewhere safe to regroup," Chris said, glancing over his shoulder nervously. "A hotel or something." Vanessa nodded. "Agreed. But we can't use my name. It'll draw too much attention." They found a small, unassuming motel on the outskirts of the city. The room was dingy with peeling wallpaper and a faint smell of mildew, but it would do. For now, safety outweighed luxury. Once inside, Vanessa pulled out her phone. It had been dead since the jungle, but she managed to charge it enough to turn it on. Dozens of notifications flooded the screen. Missed calls, text messages, emails. Most were from Laura, her assistant, who had clearly been frantic with worry. Vanessa ignored them for now. There was only one person she needed to contact first. She dialed a number from memory, her fingers trembling slightly as the phone rang. After 3 rings, a familiar voice answered. "Vanessa? Where have you been? Everyone's been looking for you." "Aaron," Vanessa said, relief washing over her at the sound of her trusted friend's voice. Aaron Cole was a journalist she had worked with in the past, someone who shared her passion for uncovering the truth. He was also one of the few people she trusted completely. "I don't have time to explain everything right now," she continued quickly, "but I need your help. Can you meet me somewhere private?" Aaron hesitated for a moment. "Of course, are you okay?" "I will be," Vanessa replied. "Just bring your laptop and anything else you might need. And don't tell anyone where you're going." An hour later, Aaron arrived at the motel, his eyes wide with concern. He was tall and lanky, with messy brown hair and glasses that always seemed slightly crooked. Despite his laid-back demeanor, he was sharp and resourceful, a perfect ally for what Vanessa had in mind. "What's going on?" Aaron asked as soon as the door closed behind him. "You look like you've been through hell." "You have no idea," Vanessa muttered, gesturing for him to sit down. "We don't have much time, so listen carefully." For the next 20 minutes, Vanessa laid out everything: her kidnapping, the compound, the abandoned lab, her father's video confession, and Eden Initiative's sinister experiments. Chris filled in the gaps, describing how Daniel and his men had forced them into this nightmare. By the end of it, Aaron was pale, his hands gripping the edge of the table. "This is insane," he whispered, shaking his head. "If even half of this is true?" "It's all true," Vanessa interrupted, her voice firm. "And we need to expose it before they cover their tracks." Aaron leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. "Okay, let's say we believe you, which I do. How do we even begin to take down something this big?" Vanessa smiled grimly. "That's where Solaris Tech comes in." Over the next several days, the trio worked tirelessly, piecing together evidence and formulating a strategy. Vanessa accessed confidential files from her company's servers, searching for any connection to Eden Initiative. What she found shocked even her. Millions of dollars had been funneled into obscure research projects under vague descriptions like advanced biotechnology and future sustainability. The money trail led directly to shell companies linked to Eden. Meanwhile, Aaron scoured public records, news articles, and leaked documents for additional proof. Using his contacts in the journalism world, he reached out to whistleblowers willing to speak anonymously about Eden's activities. One former scientist described witnessing horrific experiments on unwilling subjects, while another recounted being coerced into falsifying data to hide the organization's failures. Chris, meanwhile, focused on logistics. He mapped out potential weak points in Eden's operations, identifying key locations and personnel who could provide valuable information. His experience as a pilot gave him insight into how large organizations operated, helping them pinpoint vulnerabilities. As the pieces began to fall into place, Vanessa felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about avenging her father anymore. It was about protecting innocent lives and ensuring that no one else suffered because of Eden's greed. One evening, as they reviewed their findings, Aaron looked up from his laptop, his expression serious. "We're ready," he said. "The evidence is solid. Once we release it, there's no turning back." Vanessa nodded, her heart pounding. "Then let's do it." They chose a secure location, an empty warehouse on the edge of the city, to broadcast their exposé. Aaron set up cameras and microphones, creating a makeshift studio. Vanessa prepared a statement, her words carefully chosen to convey the gravity of the situation without inciting panic. When everything was in place, Aaron pressed record. Vanessa stepped in front of the camera, her face calm but resolute. "My name is Vanessa Monroe," she began, her voice steady. "What I am about to share with you is not speculation, it is fact. For decades, an organization known as Eden Initiative has operated in secret, conducting unethical experiments on human beings in pursuit of genetic enhancement. Their actions have caused unimaginable suffering, and their reach extends further than anyone could have imagined." She paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. "I discovered this conspiracy not by choice, but because they targeted me. My father, Marcus Monroe, was one of their founders. Before his death, he tried to stop them, but they silenced him. Now, it is my responsibility to finish what he started." Behind her, images and videos appeared on the screen. Documents detailing Eden's crimes, footage from the abandoned lab, and testimonies from whistleblowers. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable. "This cannot continue," Vanessa concluded, her voice rising with conviction. "I call on governments, corporations, and citizens around the world to demand accountability. Eden Initiative must be dismantled, and those responsible must face justice." When the recording ended, Aaron uploaded the video to multiple platforms, ensuring it would spread quickly. Within minutes, social media erupted with reactions. News outlets picked up the story, flooding airwaves and websites with coverage. The world watched in shock as Vanessa Monroe exposed one of the greatest conspiracies in modern history. Back at the warehouse, the trio sat in silence, watching the fallout unfold on a nearby TV. Protesters gathered outside Eden's headquarters, chanting for transparency and reform. Law enforcement agencies launched investigations, raiding facilities and seizing documents. It was chaos, but it was progress. "You did it," Chris said softly, breaking the quiet. "You actually did it." Vanessa shook her head, her expression somber. "Not yet. This is just the beginning. Eden won't go down without a fight." Aaron nodded in agreement. "Then we keep fighting. Together." Vanessa glanced at both of them, gratitude swelling in her chest. For the first time in days, she allowed herself a small smile. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she knew she wouldn't face them alone. The days that followed Vanessa's exposé were a whirlwind of activity. News outlets around the world couldn't stop talking about Eden Initiative. Protesters filled the streets, demanding justice and accountability. Governments scrambled to respond, launching investigations into the organization's activities. It was as if the entire planet had been shaken awake by Vanessa's revelation. But not everyone was happy about it. As the story spread, so did resistance. Powerful figures with ties to Eden began pushing back, trying to discredit Vanessa and her allies. Some claimed the evidence was fabricated, while others accused her of having ulterior motives. Anonymous threats flooded her inbox, warning her to stop before things got worse. Vanessa knew this would happen. She had expected pushback from those who benefited from Eden's secrecy, but she refused to back down. Every threat, every accusation only strengthened her resolve. She wasn't fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for everyone Eden had hurt. Chris and Aaron stood firmly by her side, working tirelessly to counteract the backlash. Chris used his knowledge of flight routes and logistics to track movements linked to Eden, helping authorities locate hidden facilities. Aaron worked around the clock, publishing follow-up articles and organizing interviews to keep the pressure on. Together, they formed a united front, determined to see this through to the end. One evening, Vanessa received an encrypted message from an unknown sender. Her heart raced as she opened it, fearing another threat. Instead, she found coordinates and a single line of text. "This is where it ends." She showed the message to Chris and Aaron, her brow furrowed in concern. "What does it mean?" she asked. "It could be a trap," Chris said immediately, his voice tense. "We can't go alone." Aaron nodded in agreement. "But if it's real, If it leads us to something big, we can't ignore it either. After some debate, they decided to investigate, but cautiously. They contacted a trusted journalist friend of Aaron's, someone with connections to independent watchdog groups. The friend agreed to send a team to monitor the location discreetly, ensuring Vanessa and her group wouldn't walk into danger unprepared. The coordinates led them to an isolated industrial complex on the outskirts of the city. The area was eerily quiet, with no signs of life except for a few security cameras mounted high on the walls. Vanessa felt a chill run down her spine as they approached the gate. Something about this place felt wrong. Using information Chris had gathered earlier, they managed to bypass the security system and slip inside. The interior was dimly lit, the air thick with the smell of chemicals. Rows of machines hummed softly, their purpose unclear. In the center of the room stood a large server bank, its blinking lights casting an eerie glow. "This must be where they store their data," Aaron whispered, pulling out a portable hard drive. "If we can copy these files, we'll have everything. We need to shut them down completely." Vanessa nodded, keeping watch as Aaron connected the device. Minutes ticked by, agonizingly slowly, each second feeling like an eternity. Just as the transfer neared completion, a voice echoed through the room. "Impressive work," the voice said coldly. "But you should have stayed out of this." They turned to see Daniel standing at the entrance, flanked by several armed guards. His expression was calm, almost amused, as if he had been expecting them all along. "You're too late," Vanessa shot back, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. "The world already knows what you've done. You can't hide anymore." Daniel smirked, shaking his head. "You think this is just about me? Eden Initiative is bigger than any one person. Even if I'm taken out, others will rise to take my place. This fight isn't over, it's only beginning." Before anyone could react, gunfire erupted outside. The sound of shouting and scuffling grew louder as the watchdog team engaged Daniel's guards. Chaos erupted in the facility, forcing Vanessa, Chris, and Aaron to dive for cover. "We need to get out of here," Chris yelled over the noise, grabbing Vanessa's arm. "No!" Vanessa shouted back, pointing to Aaron, who was still crouched by the server bank. "We can't leave without the data." Aaron frantically yanked the hard drive free, stuffing it into his backpack. "Got it," he cried, scrambling to his feet. Together they bolted toward the exit, dodging bullets and debris as they went. The scene outside was chaotic. Guards and watchdog members exchanged fire, smoke filling the air. Amid the confusion, they spotted a narrow alleyway leading away from the complex. "Go," Chris urged, shoving Vanessa and Aaron ahead of him. They sprinted down the alley, hearts pounding as they put distance between themselves and the battle. Once they reached a safe spot, Vanessa collapsed against a wall, gasping for breath. Her hands trembled as she clutched her chest, adrenaline still coursing through her body. "We made it," Aaron panted, clutching his backpack tightly. "We actually made it." Chris glanced back toward the complex, his jaw clenched. "For now. But Daniel's right. They won't stop coming after us." Vanessa straightened up, her eyes blazing with determination. "Then we won't stop fighting back." In the weeks that followed, the world changed. Governments dismantled Eden Initiative's operations, arresting key figures and seizing assets. Laws were passed to regulate genetic research, ensuring nothing like this could happen again. Vanessa became a symbol of resilience and courage, inspiring countless others to stand up against corruption. But she didn't stop there. Using her wealth and influence, Vanessa founded a new organization dedicated to ethical scientific advancement. She partnered with researchers, activists, and policymakers to create solutions that prioritized humanity over profit. Solaris Tech shifted its focus entirely, channeling resources into projects aimed at healing the planet rather than exploiting it. Chris found a renewed sense of purpose as well. He joined Vanessa's foundation, using his skills to transport supplies and personnel to underserved communities. For the first time in years, he felt like he was making a difference, not just for himself but for others. Aaron continued his work as a journalist, uncovering stories that held power accountable. He often collaborated with Vanessa, writing exposés that kept the public informed and engaged. Their partnership became legendary, a testament to the strength of truth and perseverance. Months later, Vanessa stood on a hill overlooking the city, the skyline glittering in the sunset. Beside her, Chris smiled faintly, watching as the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the horizon. "What are you thinking about?" he asked quietly. Vanessa sighed, her gaze thoughtful. "Everything that's happened. My father, Eden. All of it. I never imagined I'd end up here doing this, but I guess sometimes life forces you to step up even when you don't want to." Chris nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. "And look how far you've come. You've changed the world, Vanessa. That's not something many people can say." She smiled softly, her heart swelling with pride and gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without you. Any of you." As they stood there together, the weight of their journey settled over them. It hadn't been easy, and it certainly wasn't over, but for the first time in a long time, they allowed themselves to feel hope. Hope that the future could be better. Hope that they had truly made a difference. And as the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, Vanessa knew one thing for certain. No matter what challenges lay ahead, she would face them head on. Because now, more than ever, she believed in the power of truth and the strength of those who fought for it.